Hello, everyone. I am Daniel. I'm a project manager for Celeritas Digital. We hold monthly webinars on animal health and veterinary industries and how we can improve technology use and workplace culture and things of that nature. We've fostered a great community around us of some professionals in the animal health and veterinary space who have facilitated conversations on everything from data use to mental health. Today, we're going to be talking about workplace culture with a person by the name of Crystal Stokes. So a little bit about Crystal. Crystal has had some early experience as a vet tech, earned a certified medical. Sorry, we're having another person named Adam joining. Hi, Adam. Nice to meet you. Okay. We have Crystal here who has early experience as a vet tech turned certified medical exercise specialist. Crystal Stokes of Full Circle Labs received her master's in counseling psychology, followed by advanced training in a variety of clinical modalities, as well as leadership and performance certificates from Harvard and Cornell. Crystal especially loves working with small to mid-sized organizations to support the wellness and performance of their teams during times of growth and challenge. So I figured who better to talk about workplace culture than the Crystal Stokes. Everyone, please say hello to Crystal. And yeah, Crystal, if you want to get the, Crystal has a series of slides that she's gonna share with us to get some of these conversations going. But first, let's get a poll here to see what our thoughts are on workplace culture in the veterinary space and animal health space. So is this poll showing up for everyone in the room?
Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, I'm going to share some of the results for this poll and we can discuss. So have you ever worked in a toxic workplace? Let's share the results of these. Have you ever worked in a toxic workplace? We've got 7 of 7 answers saying yes. Do you think that a company's culture impacts the level of burnout? 7 of 7 answered yes. Do you think that a company's culture impacts levels of turnover? 6 of 7 answered yes. 1 of 7 answered no. That's interesting. And then we have, do you think that a company's culture impacts revenue? We have 6 of 7 saying yes. 1 of 7 saying, I'm not sure. I think that one's going to be a good discussion. And do you believe that building a cohesive culture is important? We got 7 of 7 on the same page saying yes, building a cohesive culture is important. And so with that, I say we get started. Crystal.
Happy to. Thank you for the introduction. And everybody, my style, I really like the engagement part of this. It's more fun if we're just in here showing our faces, showing up and really talking through these. So I'm going to give information, but I also want to hear from you and what you think. So I really want to encourage you to come and play in the sandbox with us. I'm going to first start off with giving you my story. It is the Full Circle story. That's my company is called Full Circle Lab. And I think this is also the story of many veterinary professionals. So you look at the top of this circle, passion and energy. I entered the world full of passion and energy for veterinary medicine, animals. It was like my religion. Ever since I was a little kid, I was pretty much obsessed with it. Went to NC State undergrad as a pre-vet student, and I was working as a veterinary technician. Back then, we were called vet techs. We didn't have the word vet assist, but I guess I probably would have been an assist. I was not registered. I was working in small animal, and then I was in exotics and wildlife. And finally, in my 3rd year, I worked as an overnight ER tech. So imagine overnight ER while going to school full time is a recipe for disaster. So I quickly entered the burnout phase of this cycle, started to feel apathy. And really, you combine that with economic euthanasia, and my heart just broke. I did not have the coping strategies or the mental capacity to understand economic euthanasia and how to work with it. And the long story short is there was one cat one day that we euthanized, and that ended my veterinary medicine career. I quit that job and I just pulled back and kind of had a quarter life crisis, and I didn't have any backup plan. I told myself I don't have what it takes to be a vet and I don't know what I'm going to do. Long story short, found myself in psychotherapy, like, oh, I need help. And through the process of therapy, I re-entered that circle up to the recovery and hope phase. I'm going to pause here with the red arrow that has leave the profession, because this is often where I enter the picture with veterinary medicine professionals and companies. Companies contact me because they're worried about attrition. They have people higher turnover levels than they want, or they want to prevent suicide. Let's be frank, suicide levels have been on the rise. So whether people are leaving vet med because they're leaving life, or they're leaving vet med because they're leaving the profession to seek another career path, I want to prevent that. I want that red arrow to go away. For me, psychotherapy was so transformative. I just had to know, what are they doing behind the scenes? Like, it felt like magic to me. So going to school to become a therapist was the natural next step to scratch that curiosity itch. And it transformed my professional career. I then shifted more into coaching. Like Daniel had mentioned, I really love leadership and performance coaching. So I was doing that across multiple industries. I had clients at Google, Facebook, law, just any industry. It was non-specific. But about 4 years ago, I had this deep existential itch of missing vet med. I thought, gosh, how could I be around medicine again? How could I be around animals again? Thought, I could volunteer as a technician. I love drawing blood, shooting x-rays. I can get in there. So I emailed a veterinarian here in town, asked her if they might need a volunteer tech. And she said, yeah, sure. Come on in. We'd love to meet you. Gave me a tour, took me to the office and said, Crystal, we don't need a technician. I was like, this is weird. I said, no, I looked you up on LinkedIn when you emailed me and I saw that you were a licensed psychotherapist. And she said, did you know we recently had a veterinary suicide in our town? I said, no, I didn't know that. And she said, yeah, we're trying to get ahead of it at our hospital and we're looking to hire a full-time clinician. Do you want a job? I was floored. I was speechless. I did not take the job because I was already fully employed, but it did start my first engagement in vet med on a project basis. Fast forward 4 years later, here I am. I work 95% of my client roster are veterinary hospitals. And I am on a mission to bring people full circle back to the top of this little circle of passion and energy for veterinary medicine. And culture is a huge part of that. If you want to reduce turnover, you want to reduce your burnout, you need to focus on your company culture. And we're going to talk all about that today. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Just a quick overview. The points we're going to touch on today, kind of rapid fire. Understanding how toxic culture takes root in the veterinary organization. Identifying types of toxic mindsets and behaviors, as well as how to address them. How to cultivate a solution-seeking mindset for your entire team to boost productivity. And finally, how to maintain strong company policies and practices to enhance your culture. Real quick, for those of you that like statistics, and I would also encourage you, if you really want to dive deep on this, go to Google Scholar and look for peer-reviewed research on the effects of culture on things like attrition, turnover, engagement, and even legal liability. There's so much information out there. I encourage you to do your own research if you want some stats. This is from the MIT Sloan Management Review. I'm not going to read through all of this because I don't want to bore you, but the long story short is that a toxic culture dramatically contributes to attrition rates. So that's turnover in your company, costs your company a lot of money. Losing employees is very expensive. It also causes a lot of disengagement and lack of productivity. When people are not happy at work, they're not going to work hard for you. And lastly, there's a higher risk of reputational damage and legal liability, which is already high in vet med, right? We don't need more of that. So those are some convincing statistics. Now I'm going to pause here for a minute and get you guys to come online and play with me. Like, let's talk this out. What are some of the elements of a cohesive work culture? And cohesive meaning that we stick together, we're in it together. And the opposite of that would be fragmented cultures, siloed cultures, fragile cultures. So from your own experience of what you've had in your work life or what you've seen, I want to know, what do you think contributes to a culture being cohesive or not?
Oh, I like this. Adam's already put in the chat approachability, which I think is big too. If you can have conversations in the workplace about tough subjects, I think that's a good sign, right? I think I've had a lot of conversations with Don specifically about things like this, about how we can bridge the gap between some of the newer generations of vet techs and people in the vet space. And so it's a challenge that I think is kind of like just open-ended that we're still trying to figure out. Elian just messaged me saying feedback is important. I agree. Being able to give feedback is important. Being able to receive feedback is big too.
Huge. You guys are nailing it.
I think transparency is a huge one too.
Okay, say more about that. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've, in the last couple of years, really embraced, that if your staff feels like you're holding something back or, you know, keeping secrets about either the position or their pay or where the company is going, they don't trust you, and therefore you're not going to have the open environment that you need.
Oh, I'd love to stick on this for a moment, because have any of you had experiences of working perhaps in corporations? So what I see is something that's very challenging in larger organizations with a corporate hierarchy, is that people that are kind of in the middle, the sandwich position, often feel like as managers, as say a medical director or a practice manager, that they have certain things that they'd love to be able to share with their staff, but they feel like they are not allowed to speak honestly. There's certain things they have to protect and hold back. So being authentic and transparent can be really challenging when you're in a sandwich position. Has anybody here experienced that?
I have, in the human medicine world. I worked for a company that had about 50,000 people, and I was what they called middle management. So I definitely, one, felt like a number, like I didn't have any personality and stuff like that. But I had no clue where the directives were coming from. All I knew is I had to trickle them down, whether or not I liked them. And that was really hard. I was actually laid off after 22 years. And the reason that I was given was that I had my employees back too much. So I just thought, well, perfect. I don't want to work here then anyway.
Yeah, that was a blessing. Isn't that just so telling? Oh,
it's weird that that's a new thing you have to be worried about. Is
right?
Being employed too much. Don said people want to feel safe, belong, and have a purpose, which I agree with. I think having a purpose is big if you want actual output and meaningful work.
And Crystal, my joke is I've been in middle management, so I always say we die young because we're like the white part of the Oreo cookie. It comes from the bottom and from the top you get squeezed in the middle. And so it's because you hear stuff. And like today, I was on a conference call and there's an announcement that's being made Monday. So I have to go all weekend knowing something that's going to affect my team. And I've still got calls this afternoon. I have to have a smiley face knowing that come Monday, they're going to say, how long did you know about this? Oh, I've known about it for a week. I just can't say anything.
It's so painful. This is where I feel like we need special support for people in the middle management role. I remember when I was hired for an operations role, this is what the CEO said to me. All right, Crystal, if you take this position, I guarantee you're going to hate it. Just to be upfront. When everything goes right, we're just going to say that was your job. And when things go wrong, we're going to blame you. That's pretty much what the role entails. And I was like, how much are you going to pay me? Right? It's really painful, but it's the psychological pressure that you're talking about. And depending on the culture, that can be your Oreo getting squeezed really hard, or in other areas, it might feel really actually like a great thing to be in middle management. The culture really can dictate how painful it is. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know you had a few things to say about this on this next slide.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring the screen back up. All right, so just to go through these points. By the way, nothing in this talk is exhaustive because we only have a short amount of time. So I'm just giving you some of my favorites, but we could talk about this for days and still not cover everything. So highlights: a sense of belonging, shared set of values, commits to working together towards common goals, pulls together, especially during times of stress. That's my favorite time to test a team. You put them in a situation where things are bad and you see how they respond. That's extremely important. They show greater resilience, values team members for their contributions and their differences, and especially their differences. That's often what makes a team even stronger because there's diversity. Gives and receives feedback often, which was already mentioned. And I would like to highlight Adam Grant. I'm a big fan. He does a lot of work on culture and organization. He's an organizational psychologist, so feel free to Google him. Now we're going to talk about how toxic culture takes root in the veterinary organization, because prevention is the best medicine. Number one, this is one of my favorites, is lack of psychological safety. Most people do not know what this means. Can I just get a show of hands? Hand up if you're not really sure what the heck this means. Ooh, well, I can't see everybody. Darn it. Okay, got it. Yeah, so I appreciate this. Psychological safety is kind of a new term on the scene, but it's been around for quite a long time. Psychological safety refers to the sense that in an organization, you have the safety to make mistakes. Like, imagine this, I'm a technician and I just realized, oh God, I think I just gave the wrong dose of medication. You know, we were rushed. It was chaotic. I think I may have pushed, double the amount. If it's not safe in that organization, if I know I'm going to get ripped a new one by my doctor, am I going to speak up? No, I'm probably going to try to hide it, right? Very dangerous. So psychological safety means I can make a mistake and bring it up. I can bring up problems. If I see something happening, like, hey, this doesn't seem to be working very well. Can we talk about it? A way to make it different. It's okay to be different, to have, whether it's how we identify ourselves, the unique skill set we bring, we're valued for our differences. We also feel safe to take interpersonal risks with how we engage with each other. And we feel like it's safe to ask for help. Those are important elements of psychological safety. If you don't have those, toxic culture is definitely going to creep in. Psychological safety is a foundational piece of a healthy culture. It's one of my favorite workshops to do for companies, because most companies do not have a language for psychological safety. But I like to come in, you do a survey, we get the data, we talk about the data, where we may be lacking psychological safety and how to build it. It's really, really, really important. Next one would be no pathways for problem solving or advancement. Imagine if you're working in an organization and you are not empowered to create solutions, they say, oh, you have to go to management for everything. And management always says, we got to take it to corporate. And corporate says, we'll get back to you in 6 months. What does that breed inside of you or an organization? Apathy, resentment, burnout, disempowerment. Really having good, strong pathways for people to grow, move through an organization and solve their own problems is very important. Next, lack of intentional cultural design, building, or maintenance. This happens a lot in smaller organizations where it's just like a doctor hangs the shingle and gets a practice manager and is like, let's just hit the ground running. And I'm just here to get the clients in, start making some money so we can operate. And before they know it, they've hired 5 more employees. And they'd say, oh, shoot, I totally forgot about culture. It's too late now. We already hired these people and the culture kind of happened accidentally. That's not a good recipe. You want to be very thoughtful. Like if you're planting a garden, you're thinking, do I want roses or vegetables? How am I going to design the garden? How am I going to weed the garden, prune the garden, and fertilize the garden? That's your culture. If you do not plan it, it's just going to take whatever shape happens and it might not be good. Oh, this is a favorite of mine. Allowing bad behaviors and keeping bad apples. Guaranteed way to ruin your culture. Get those bad apples out, clean up those behaviors fast. And lastly, a poorly structured hiring and or onboarding process. You need to hire for cultural fit. You need to know what kind of culture you want in your company and look for people that are going to meet that requirement. You can train skills. Training personality is a whole different thing. And then the onboarding process, let's say you hire somebody that fits your culture great. You're so excited about them, but then you don't have a good onboarding process. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to feel like they don't have support. It can lead to them, some people don't make it through the onboarding process. If there's not an onboarding process, they're like, this company doesn't have their stuff together. I'm leaving.
I've heard horror stories about no onboarding processes where you're just kind of like fumbling around to figure things out. You're like, is this how everyone learns? Yeah.
I mean, who here's experienced that? I remember for me in the overnight ER that I worked at in my 3rd year, there was no real onboarding process. It was just like a very dark hospital working overnight, I worked 11 to 12 or 12 to 12. And there's just like, there's a manual over there. You can look at it when you're not with an animal.
Wow.
Oh, hello. Anybody else experience a difficult onboarding process?
I know you were talking about hiring processes too, and that's unfortunately normal in many vet hospitals, Adam is saying.
Mhm.
Don, Don works in animal health, but I know you were saying you had a specific process for hiring. We're talking back and forth about you doing interviews for people. How do you go about those kinds of things, or at least the hiring process in general, in a healthy way, where you're
To Crystal's point, we learn the hard way. Hire for culture. We can train you later, but if you don't fit the culture, it's I don't know if there's any HR people on the line, but once you hire them, it's hard to get rid of them. So it's better to stop it at the interview process to say, this is our culture. This is what we do. This is, even though we work individually, you're on a team. And it's made a huge difference in bringing people in that fit the team, instead of saying, well, you've got the skill set, we can teach you what our culture is.
right. Is there like any general way that you can kind of identify if someone's going to be kind of oppositional to whatever you're going for?
So my new interview question is, I always say, hey, Crystal, what's your boss's name? And then, well, I'll pick on you, Daniel. Daniel, what's your boss's name? What's his first name?
Okay, Imran.
Okay. So if I met Iran and I took him out to Starbucks for coffee, what one thing would Iran say? Daniel's a great employee, but if he just did this, he'd be better. And I'm surprised, by asking the question that way, they really open up and tell you a true statement, and you get a feel for. I've had people say, oh, he's going to say I'm lazy, but I'm not, or they tell you stuff of like, hey, I just don't fit. And it just makes it conversational. And you just get the feeling of, we talk about what I want to spend if I'm calling on veterinarians. If I don't want to spend 5-10 minutes with this person, why would my customer want to? Why would your pet parents want to spend time with that tech if they don't have a good personality that fits your culture?
Oh, Don, I have to say, I can feel you're really easy to talk to. I think being in an interview process with you would be fun.
Yeah, they say I'm the dark cloud because I'll ask the hard questions like that, because if you say, well, I don't know what he would say, he would probably say, no, what did he say? It's really honing in with people on what is your true personality? What am I seeing behind the resume?
I love it. And if I were being interviewed by you, I'd be like, well, Don, what would your employees say about you to me?
Yeah.
That'd be so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm sure you get the people who are like, my employer would say that I am too nice. I hate how nice I am and everyone around me. It's very frustrating for them too.
Yeah,
that's right.
So funny. Awesome. Well, I'll go back to the screen share, because now we're getting into some of the juicy things that I love. Identifying toxic mindsets. Again, there are so many. So I'm just going to share with you the 3 that I see most often in the veterinary hospitals that I work with. And keep in mind, the dose makes the poison, meaning a little bit of each of these might be a great thing to have, like use it strategically. But if you're engaging in these mindsets all the time, it's not going to serve you well. Perfection. So perfectionistic mindset, I just want to give a little bit of info here. This is where you would maybe thinking to yourself, if I want it done right, I have to do it myself. Or it's never good enough, because ultimately we never reach perfection. So it's just constant, like more, better, never satisfied. It can be a real recipe for exhaustion and depression. And often with a perfectionistic mindset, we don't celebrate what is working. We're always looking at what's not working, what we need to improve. And we know that gratitude is an extremely important practice. Next, being overly production or results oriented. The United States culture is very much a heavily driven achievement and results-based culture. We tend not to celebrate the process. So when we're focused only on results and production, how we get there doesn't matter. So that means we don't care who we hurt. We don't care what means we take. And that can be really dangerous. Also, it can lead to burnout, because we're just going to work until we get the job done. And also, there's a sense that your value is pinned to what you produce, which is very fragile. Lastly, the mindset of being right or rigid. And this can really stifle growth. It prevents people from speaking up, limits creativity, and causes a lot of fragility and fear. So I just want to pause there for a moment and ask you guys, have you experienced any of these toxic mindsets? I will say personally, that I am a recovering, results-oriented type of person. I was raised to be that way. I definitely felt like my value was based on what I produced, such as A's, boy, that was hard to get over. And I've also worked with a lot of veterinary professionals that tend to be perfectionistic. And I think that it really helps get through vet school. But once you get into the clinic and start practicing and you realize it's a whole other ballgame, it can be really difficult. So I'd love to hear from you if you relate to any of these mindsets.
Yeah, I can relate to the being right or rigid mindset. I feel like where a lot of hospitals go wrong is a lot of this can be interpreted as being elitist, and that can really spawn a negative work culture where you might start thinking that your hospital is better than others, or certain technicians are better than others, or certain doctors are better than others, and elitism really heads you down a negative work culture path, in my experience.
Ooh, I feel scared just thinking about it. Like if I was working with someone who had that mindset, I think I would just shrink away and feel intimidated.
It sounds like a fine line though. How do you, Adam, for example, like if you're trying to measure up against a different doctor's opinion or a different clinic, for example, and you're trying to walk the fine line of having your credibility and having confidence in your output versus a different hospitals. How do you walk that line of being right but not being elitist and not being rigid and not being, is that a fair question?
Yeah. What I try to do is I try to let everybody know that there are lots and lots of right ways to do things. There are definitely wrong ways, but we don't know the whole story with this client, this patient, and that doctor and that hospital. We can only treat the patient as we see it right now, the best way that we know how to do it, instead of comparing what we are doing to what other people are doing.
Right. Okay. That's good. That's fair.
Said. Awesome. I'll go back to the screen share then. So I want to show you the antidotes. What do we do about it? For perfection, you really want to shift over to resilience. I am such a big fan of resiliency, as one of my specialties as a therapist is anxiety and trauma. And the way we treat that is to say, don't avoid it. Don't try to get away from it. Just learn to be resilient. Bad things are going to happen. You're going to have moments where you feel anxious, but we can face it and learn to be stronger. So same thing when it comes to perfection. If we can trade out perfection for saying, I have to be perfect, we're going to do the best job we can. And if something goes wrong, we're going to deal with it in the moment. We're going to bounce back from it. Shifting from production and results mindset to purposeful and relational. I really love this one. It's about thinking about the purpose behind why you're here and why are you working. When you're there with an animal or with a pet parent, yes, you want the result, which is that animal to be healthy and well, but how do you engage in the moment from the animal being here to the animal being there? That whole process in between, how you relate to the animal, how you relate to your staff, how you relate to the pet parent, all of that is extremely important on the other side of that result. And then next, being right, rigid, or fixed, and switching over to curious, adaptable, and a growth mindset. I think I have her. Yeah. So Carol Dweck of Stanford does a lot of work on growth mindset, some fabulous talks. I think she's done TED Talks as well. It just speaks to when we're thinking about how to solve problems, we come into it instead of saying, I know the answer, this is the right way. We come in and say, I think I know the answer, but I'm open to exploring other options. And are there other possibilities, and asking people to contribute? And that's where the diversity within your culture can really shine, because people from different backgrounds, or they may have different ways of thinking, can bring a whole new illumination to how to solve a problem. Right? Cool. Now let's talk about behaviors. I guess most of you as veterinary professionals or somewhere in the field, we do a lot with behaviors. Like people come in and say, oh gosh, my cat, they keep, peeing outside of the litter box, or my dog keeps chewing everything up or eating squeaky toys. And so we think a lot about how do we train for behaviors. Well, it's very similar with humans. The three toxic behaviors that I see the most often in hospitals are triangulation and gossip. Triangulation means, let's say, Daniel, I have a problem with Daniel. I am so annoyed because he never takes out the trash. Well, instead of going to Daniel directly, a straight line, right? I don't go to Daniel. I go gossip with somebody else up here and I make a triangle. I'm going to go to Clint and be like, Clint, oh my gosh, I cannot stand Daniel. He never takes out the trash, blah, blah, blah. It's very destructive because one, it doesn't actually solve the problem. I'm not going to Daniel and talking to him about the issue, so it's not going to get fixed. And when I go to Clint and gossip with him, in the back of his mind, he's thinking, hey, if she's going to talk about Daniel behind his back, she'll probably talk about me. And that erodes psychological safety. Yelling and complaining. Complaining is just a huge waste of time. We complain, we're not actually asking for anything to be fixed. I'm just like, he never takes out the trash. Okay, what's your point? Are you asking me to take out the trash? Because that's different. That's a request. You're just complaining. Or I've worked in practices where, you know, I've had, for instance, people in leadership that just don't have a much emotional regulation and they fly off the handle and yell and scream when something goes wrong. And that makes the team feel very unsafe and very fearful. Lastly, this is a little more sneaky and under the radar. Avoidance, stonewalling, or passive aggressive behavior. Some examples would be procrastination, snarky comments, and appearing to comply, but then rebelling privately. Like, Daniel, would you please take out the trash? And he says, sure. And then he doesn't do it. Okay. So let's just pause there for a second, ask you guys, what kind of toxic behaviors have you experienced in your workplace? And they don't have to be on this list. It can be anything. I'm sure there are many more toxic behaviors that you all have seen.
I just before that, I wanted to say that I saw in the chat that Eliam was talking about something you can kind of understand as a general toxic behavior with that comes with elitism. She's saying elitism can also be tied to endurance, whether you can go through that meat grinder and that hazing and just not break down. But that isn't healthy, is it? Doesn't allow you to acknowledge your own pain. That's an interesting point. I wonder if that kind of process is involved in the veterinary space, the kind of like a hazing or something where you're being tested on whether you'll speak out against the toxic mindsets. I'm seeing Kristen kind of nod. Do you have any experience with that? I don't want to call you out, but like I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, I have worked as many years as a technician as I have as a veterinarian. So a lot of this stuff is like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've seen that so much in a workplace. But yeah, I do think that there is kind of a culture of, you know, I went through this, so you should too. You know, it's like only the strong survive and trial by fire and all of that. I feel like that's almost every clinic that I've worked in. I feel like kind of had that, you know, mindset in some place or another. But I don't know what it is about veterinary medicine, or if this is just commonplace in other businesses as well.
It's not unique to vet med. It's actually, I think, many of the professions that have higher levels of education. So you see it in law, human medicine, even psychotherapy. Like, becoming a psychotherapist, when you graduate, you have 3,000 hours of clinical work you have to do where they pay you almost no money, zero or very little money. You definitely get hazed. It's the same. So I think that there's this kind of, it's baked into to many different professions, unfortunately. Yeah. Clint, what about you? I mean, you have a JD. Did you experience that through law school?
No, it wasn't so bad actually. No. But people who generally go to law school love to argue anyway, so it's just like a place where you can argue all the time. So yeah, it's totally fine. Yeah.
Well, and how about the other things on that list, the toxic behaviors? Have you all experienced, you know, somebody being avoidant or stonewalling you? Have you experienced gossip or triangulation or complaining and yelling? Have you done it yourself? Don't lie.
A work that's a scary one. I mean, this sounds like maybe common behaviors in interpersonal relationships, but if you start showing like behaviors like that at the workplace, I think that's when it's real far gone. I know you have something you talk about, Crystal, about like if it's not too far gone, like, you know, but I see it as the vet space just being a stressful industry in general. And so I think that there's more of an open door to kind of these negative coping strategies or just toxic behaviors coming to light if you're not on top of things.
Yes. I love that you're saying that. All right, I'm going to bring up the slide because it's going to lead us into the next thing. You're so right. And I'll just go quickly over to give you guys the punchlines here. What do you do about it? Here are the different ways you can address these. Now, what I like what Daniel said is like, could your culture be too far gone? I believe there's no culture that's too far gone. I've had experiences in hospitals where I've walked in, one in particular, I said, this place is like a morgue. You know, it's the last place you want to be on earth. And I've been working with them for a number of years, and now it's one of my favorite places to be. And it takes time, it takes patience, but often what happens is that when we're under stress, all of us, myself included, as a highly trained psychotherapist, my worst self comes out when I am burned out, when I'm not getting food or a bathroom break, when I'm working way too many hours, when I don't have support. Our worst self presents itself. So right there, I have a lot of compassion. When I see people engaging in bad behaviors, I say, if this is your baseline, you're probably down here. You don't have the emotional bandwidth to keep the lid on, on yourself to keep your emotions, under control or show up in a professional way. I also say that many of us have never learned correct behaviors. If we were modeled inappropriate behaviors in previous jobs or, throughout our younger years, then how would we know what to do? So for instance, complaining is extremely common. I see this as well, as a therapist working with couples. We often help people say, hey, if you're complaining about your husband not taking out the trash, stop complaining and just go directly to your husband and say, honey, I'd really appreciate if you take out the trash every Friday. Could you do that for me? Done, right? So a lot of this is just having somebody come in to actually just train the behaviors and give people language for them. So instead of gossiping and triangulating, you just use direct, respectful communication. Instead of yelling and complaining, you make a specific request in a calm way. And instead of using avoidance behaviors, you would name the behavior. And I think I have another, thought I had a point there. Sorry, let me go back. You would just name the behavior and say like, hey, Daniel, I'll pull you aside. Let's go in a room. I noticed that whenever I ask you to take out the trash, you say you're going to do it, but then you don't do it. I just want to check in with you and see what's going on and how we can improve this, right? Not difficult. Any comments there? Should I keep going? So just real quick, I'll run through a list, just give you a few more tools. Again, I'd encourage you guys, if you want to take notes, please do. If there are any of these ideas you want to take into your practice, that's the whole point today. Some additional solutions to end toxic behavior would be include discussions about mindset and behaviors in team meetings. Talk about this overtly, like get your team to talk about it. Give your staff clear directions about the types of behaviors you do and do not want. Yeah. Yes, no behaviors. Like I think about my cat, kitty cat. No, I do not want you on the counters. Yes, I want you on the floor. So that means I'll give my cat a little treat, a little pet on the floor. Good kitty. That's where I want you. Cat's on the counter. I'm like, no, this is not where I want you. Put the cat back on the floor. You can do the same thing with your staff. Promote building strong and authentic relationships as a foundation to support higher levels of productivity. Hold conflict resolution sessions with a trained professional. I come in a lot to do this with companies that have the same recurring fights over and over and over between people and they cannot resolve them. That has got to be cleaned up, and it's actually not that hard. And then promote direct communication with kindness. Please, people, try to be kind with your directness. Try not to be too blunt. I know that when we're under stressful situations in hospitals, we tend to move really fast. But all you have to do, and I had to train myself in this because I tend to be overly blunt, is just to say thank you or please at the end or the beginning of your sentence. All right, we're coming down the home stretch here, only a couple more slides. Cultivating a solution-seeking mindset to boost productivity. All right, this is a little bit, I'm going to ask you to use your brain here. Why do you think productivity would be boosted if we had a solution-seeking mindset? Why would that make us more productive? I hear the Jeopardy music playing in the background.
I'll jump in and say, I think that it's more like brainstorming. You might come up with better ideas and somebody might have a better way of doing something and you're become more efficient because you're getting that input from the people that are actually doing the thing.
Excellent. You crushed it. Anybody else?
I just agree with what Kristen's saying. I think that's the good part about having conversations like this. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of what you're talking about, Crystal, team building. And it's like, outsourcing the answers. You can't get all the answers on your own. And so it's good to strike a thought with other people who might be of a similar or different mindset.
Totally. And think about what's the opposite. If we're not seeking solutions, we're probably complaining about problems, right? I see a lot of this, like, oh, management never does blah, blah, blah. Dr. So-and-so is yada, yada, yada. That technician is so blah, blah, blah. That client, blah, blah, blah. We just, a lot of energy goes into complaining. So back to the screen. My favorite part is that shifting energy from complaining to creating solutions. That means you're spending that energy one way or another. If we're spending it just complaining about problems, it's like you just took a bunch of energy and poured it on the floor. It just sits there. Instead, we pick that energy back up and we spin it up here. And we have ideas and solutions we can test. Oh, that's so much more productive. And it feels better too. It's a contagious thing. When people start practicing this, they can't stop. So here's some things to help support a solution-seeking mindset. You want to make sure you have trust and psychological safety built, because with that, people feel more comfortable taking risks to propose solutions, right? They'll go out on a limb and say, hey, I have an idea. You also provide consistent support and pathways for staff to speak up, debrief, and clarify needs. You get a lot of great information when people know the pathways they can take to speak up and advocate. You also want to hold regularly occurring meetings that include discussions of team culture, dynamics, and challenges to address. So people just know, a lot of times in companies that don't have regular meetings, there's this sense of a pressure cooker. Like people are holding it all in. They're like, oh, there are all these things that are bothering me, but there's never an outlet to talk about it. If they know there's going to be a meeting every other week or once a month or once a quarter, it kind of gives a sense of relaxation and ease, knowing it's going to be addressed eventually. Lastly, engage your staff in designing, testing, and implementing and adapting solutions. Get them involved. Don't just say, kick the ball up to management and expect management to do everything. No, because first of all, it takes forever. And two, it doesn't make you stronger. Say, how about you solve that problem? A tech comes in, they say, you know what? I feel like this stuff with the blood work, it's just really inefficient. I'd say, cool, technician. I want to hear your genius idea for how we might solve it. Come back to me with 3 different ideas and we'll see which one we want to test. Yeah, really fun. And finally, last slide with content today, I believe, is how to maintain strong company policies and practices to enhance your culture. For those of you that know me well, my brother's actually on the line, he would laugh. I've been blamed as being a little bit rigid. I love structure. I think structure allows people to relax. I think structure, our nervous systems are built for it. Like you look at babies, how we start as infants all the way through. If you have your biorhythms in place, when you eat, sleep, drink, you have rhythms to how you work. These structures and policies do create a real foundation upon which you can build a very strong company culture. So you want to create policies, again, this is not exhaustive, that allow team members to actively engage in creating solutions, that empowers them, celebrate and promote diversity. Here's one of my favorites. Oh my gosh. Consistently measure and discuss company culture. Data, data, data. I love surveying companies. You can do monthly surveys, quarterly surveys, whatever your heart desires, surveys. You can collect quantitative data. Those are some numbers, qualitative data, getting them to answer some longer questions, and then talk about the data. It's so fun. And it really gets your team engaged to know we're watching the trend line in our company change with regards to our culture. You also want to build structure to cultivate a strong culture, these are some of my favorites. For instance, in management, I always encourage my managers or medical directors to send out weekly email shout outs for moments of resiliency and kindness. And I don't mean positive toxicity. Like one of my companies just went through a major software update and it was horrible. It was so stressful. And we sent out shout outs to how all these people, buckled up, they pushed through it, they stuck with it. They complained less, they solved problems more, and we celebrated that, right? So those kind of shout outs of when people get through a difficult client interaction or a difficult euthanasia, that is huge. Also, regularly well-scheduled team meetings. Huge pet peeve of mine are meetings that go like this. Oh, we have a meeting at 3:00 that ends at 4:00, but it actually doesn't start until 3:15. Then it lasts until 5 p.m. and there was no agenda, right? That drives people crazy and it makes them never want to come back to a meeting. Be very, very, very structured with your meetings. You start them on time, you end them on time, you stick to your agenda, and things that don't fit on the agenda go in the parking lot for next time. If you're consistent with that, your meetings will become very productive and actually something people look forward to attending. Also, hold offsite fun, non-work activities to build relationships. Make it opt-in, like come if you want, no pressure, but that's a great way to build your company culture. And then also keep updating your benefits package. Make sure your benefit package really evolves with your culture and provides things to your team that your company culture really wants. Like it aligns with the values of your culture. Next, hold your staff accountable to the values that you set and align your recruiting strategies, and I would even say onboarding strategies, to reinforce your intended culture. Be very intentional about how you bring people onto your team and how you nurture them through that onboarding process. And in closing, I'm going to leave off with this today. 2 questions for you all. You can answer both or just one, but I'd love to hear from each of you in the chat or verbally your biggest takeaway from this talk. What landed for you? And is there one thing that you might want to implement in your practice now?
I can talk about a couple of things that relate to what we see all the time in a lot of hospitals. So we get, of course, we get calls all the time of hospitals being attacked, like cyber attacks, not physical attacks. And I think it's twofold. We see a lot like we can tell which hospitals are toxic and which ones aren't. Immediately, like the practice manager, the owner calls us and they're like, I can't believe Sally, our receptionist, she's such an idiot. Like, how did she click on that email? I never would have done that. Now what do we do? And as somebody who thinks about this stuff like 40 hours a day, like one thing I always talk about is like an example of like how I've been compromised. Like it's not a matter of when, it's just a matter of if. And even if you think about it all the time, there's still risk. And then we can always tell the ones that are good because they're like the person who did it is involved. They feel terrible, but you can tell like this ownership isn't mad. And they're just like, how do we how do we start taking the right steps? And how do we start to resolve this? And then back to your thing on psychological safety, I think that we also talk a lot about, and I think is actually the most important thing that we ever do at the hospital. Like we can implement the latest and greatest tools to protect Avmark, Impromet, or whatever, it doesn't matter. But if the staff doesn't feel safe to come to you if they've made a mistake, it doesn't matter because they're going to try to shuffle it under the rug. And then the longer we wait to take action, the worse it becomes. So it's always like the number one thing you can take away from this, like before you spend any money with us, before you do anything with us to help you protect the data in your hospital or manage technology in your hospital, like your staff has to feel comfortable to come to you if they make a mistake, because if they don't, nothing we do matters because they'll try to hide it and we can't clean it up at that point because they'll delete things. We have no idea what data they got access to. It just makes our job 100 times harder and worse. So I think it's kind of a mixture of things. So for us, but then I guess the hardest thing for me is like when we get those toxic hospitals, like you try to tell them, it's not really Sally's fault or Jane's fault or Bob's fault or whoever, like it's going to happen, but it just never seems to land. And then it's also hard because I'm like, it's not really my place to try to change your company culture, but yeah. So it's something we see a lot and probably the thing we talk about most before we look at implementing any tools in a hospital.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. What about the rest of you? Any takeaways or things you want to implement?
I kind of want to build on what Clint was saying, just because it sparked a thought. I was just thinking, this whole week because of this conversation about what kind of like encapsulates the idea of a toxic workplace. Aside from all of these individual markers, I think that something you said, Clint, just not being able to make mistakes, or feeling like you're in an environment where you're not allowed to make mistakes. It's like the main cutoff to any growth. And that's how like there's nowhere to go from there. If you can't learn from your mistakes, you can't grow. And then that's kind of the definition of a toxic workplace, I think. Mm-hmm. So I just appreciate you mentioning that. But yeah, let's hear from Kristen, Michelle, Cody, Adam, Margarita. I know we didn't meet Adam or Margarita in the beginning. You guys joined a little later on. So if you want to introduce yourselves late, that works too.
Yeah, where are you guys located?
I'm in York, Pennsylvania, and I have actually a pretty similar experience to you. I was a veterinary technician for about 8 years. I started in general practice in New York City, and then my wife and I moved to Florida, where I worked with exotics and eventually ER, ICU specialty, and I was a surgical assistant, and really felt myself getting burnt out, and I felt like it was non-sustainable. You know, felt like I was at the top of the technician field, making $17 an hour. You know, so I switched careers for a little while, but you know, once you're here, you feel like you come back to it eventually. So I found myself as a practice manager of an ER right when COVID hit. You know, so it was really difficult. And now I'm managing. It's considered a general practice, but we do a lot more than just general practice here. We do a lot of exotics, and we have a traveling specialty surgeon, and I really feel like I'm able to impact the field and the people that I lead. And something that I really took away from this presentation was I'm a really analytical and numbers-based person, and I could absolutely do better at making things more than just a production or results oriented. You know, I could make it a lot more purposeful and relational. I think we have monthly full staff meetings where I put all of our reviews of the month, which I feel is kind of a qualitative way to show how we're doing things. When I was at the ER, I would send out weekly emails that showed how many pets we treated, but I feel like that's still, you know, production and results oriented, and I don't think that they related to that as I did. But yeah, I can always try to be more relational and purposeful in that respect.
I love that. I'll be putting my contact information up at the end of this. And if you ever want to reach out to just brainstorm ideas, I love it. Where you're at, your position is such a fun time, you know, to kind of evolve that. So definitely feel free to reach out. And I'd love to hear from Margarita. I don't know if you're in the vet med world, but we'd love to hear from you. And I know Michelle, Kristen, Don, all three of you are in vet med. So if you have anything to add, it'd be fabulous to hear your points.
I think for me, what I kind of took away is I've been a really strong proponent of vetting everybody that I hire. Warm bodies just don't cut it anymore. And I think this gave me a little bit more power behind me to make the management above me support me in that, because it's so hard when we're short-staffed, but just hiring anybody is not the answer. So I think, you know, that's a fine line to walk there, but I think the culture has to mean more than just somebody that's there.
1000%. And also, if you hire the wrong person, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's going to erode your culture and hurt the people that you have that you want to keep. So it's it can be, the downside is really big. I think that's strength in advocating. I commend you. It is so important. How about Kristen or Don?
Yeah, I think something that I think is challenging for us as a company that does strictly mobile work, and we don't really see each other face to face very often. You know, something that I think would be a takeaway for me is maybe implementing more meetings are not just being talked at on, you know, like our meetings are usually on, you know, this type of platform, but everybody's muted and everybody's cameras are off because we're, you know, usually driving somewhere or whatever, and we're just hearing, you know, the upper management talk to us. Like maybe having something where we can interact a little bit more. You know, getting people together is difficult because we're so spread out as to like where we live. But you know, I think that might help us kind of feel more like a cohesive culture, and most of our communication is on Slack. So, you know, just saying please and thank you, I think was honestly one takeaway that I'm taking away here, is just adding a little you know, personality to our conversations, even when it's in text format.
Yes, you're bringing up a good one. Like the virtual part adds a whole new layer and can make it more challenging. I really like the points you're making of how you might be able to just make it a little bit more engaging and more real. And I see Margarita just dropped us a note there in the chat, said her microphone's not working, but It's good to have you on. Oh, from Portugal. That's fabulous. But she had a toxic team issues, trying to help owners with. Great. Yeah. And Daniel, I'll just go ahead and put up the screen one last time, just with my contact information. I mean, easy to reach me. Easy to find lab.com. My LinkedIn's there. Email's great. And if anybody has any follow-up questions afterwards, I encourage you to reach out.
I put Crystal's LinkedIn and my LinkedIn in the chat as well. So if you guys want to go over there and add us, I know I'm happy to accept any connection requests, Crystal probably too, right?
Absolutely. I love connecting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so we can continue this conversation after this as well. If you want to screenshot Crystal's info there, we're recording this as well, so we can send you a post-webinar recording and some notes that you can share around if you see fit. And we're going to aim for doing another discussion like this next month, what the conversation may be, up for grabs. So if you guys have any suggestions, let me know. If you have any facilitators in mind, let me know. But I'm really glad that all of you can join. Elian said, I think what you said about being intentional is so important. The bare practice of having team meetings and sessions and rewards for the sake of it, without purpose or goals to meet, it's empty. Yeah, that's right. And I've seen the pressure cooker without any conversations there. So I can appreciate that too. Thank you everyone who joined today and all of the great input you've given. It's going to keep good conversations going, hopefully into the future. So if you want to join next month, keep in contact. Crystal, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Daniel. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to put this together. So everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. And we will chat soon.
Yeah,
All
great
right.
meeting everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.